well, I could, but I feel like it's going to be less awkward to transition into like an inclusive debate that is funny than to like go into like a
recording, so
I think
yeah.
it is spoiler.
Yeah. Right.
it's
Okay, cool.
just a mess. I'd noticed
Cool.
it.
That's nice one.
Stick it
on. Emergency.
It's going to come in. Yeah, the whole general best. Yeah. Well, there's a general account. Not officially. Chat. We had a chat with a few of them at Festival. Right. So yeah, I'm sort of roaming a revolutionary consultant. That's not too much contradiction. trying to get what's happening in the States, but everyone's always calling out each other.
How to get there, yeah. So I'm just going to be, you know, like you two are both change makers, right? From very different perspectives and positions. And I guess it's like, you know, us working out what your vision of, you know, 10 years' time or a good place looks like, might be the first question, and how we get there with your different idiosyncratic kind of approaches to changing things. And then we'll kind of pick them apart. Talk about what's working, what's not working. More radical, less radical. Yeah. I think we need to wait for everyone to come in, Roger. They'll probably give us a sign. No, just arrived. Where have you been? Oh, just having like debates with people. Well, so you're stuck in the bar, talking to people. Oh, that's right. Unfinished, yeah. So, if you was... Start? Okay, let's shut the doors. Hello, everyone. Hope you've had a great festival so far. Welcome to Systems Change and How to Get There. It's a conversation with Zach Goldsmith and Roger Hallam, which you'll know. For a bit of context as to why I'm here and to reassure you that I'm not totally unqualified for this discussion, I've spent a lifetime protesting in various different ways, some on TV for sort of TV protest shows like The Revolution we televise, often IRL in person, without even filming myself or tweeting about it, which will sound odd to the younger members of the crowd. And we're here today to talk about systems change and how to get there, which I'm very excited about because, as you will know, these two characters come from very different positions in regard to that question. We have Roger Hallam, environmental activist, theorist, and founder of Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil. He won't know this, but I was actually part of his organisation at the very start, helping you to organise that, so you can thank me later. Zach Goldsmith, conservative politician and former Minister of the Environment, who resigned this summer in protest at his party's inability to do anything for the environment, apparently. I also briefly worked for Zach, you won't remember it either, as an intern. Unpaid, although I won't publicly shame you about that. But I had a great time, he was a great boss, so there's a link. So yes, Roger and Zach don't disagree on the problem we face, right? This is an existential environmental catastrophe that even the sort of more right-wing members of Zach's party are aware of, I think, at this point. All you have to do is go on Twitter these days and the news looks like the Book of Exodus, but with more memes. They're both deeply concerned about this, but they have very different approaches to how to change it. Roger's very much an outside-in kind of guy, I think. Very much trying to change things with sort of mass disruptive protest. And when I think Roger says change, I think he sort of more means tear it all down and start again. Zach's very much an inside kind of guy, is that fair to say? Was a more inside kind of guy, trying to change things from the inside in a party. Some might say is ideologically committed to not changing things. So brave of him to do so, and brave of him to quit this summer. So it promises to be a fascinating discussion, I think everyone will agree. So on to the main event. I think the first thing I'd like to ask both these guys is, if we're talking about change and how to get there, put ourselves 10 years' time in the future, Roger, starting with you. Things have gone well. Everything's gone better than you could possibly have expected. I know this is difficult for you because you like to describe apocalyptic events on Twitter quite regularly, but things have gone really well. What does it look like, and how did Just Stop Oil help get us there?
Hello, everyone. I'm quite well known for not answering questions, so I'm not going to be answering that question. I may come back to it, but the first thing I want to say is thank you very much for coming, and also I want to thank Zach for sharing a platform with me, because as you know, dare I say it, no one in the Labour Party would even dream of sharing a platform with me. So I don't know what that says, but it says something. The second thing is that I always feel like when we talk about the catastrophe that is coming down the line, there's always a tendency, particularly in nice, polite gatherings like this, to not actually say what that catastrophe is. And I am going to say a few things that might sound a little bit outlandish, and maybe they'll sound a bit less outlandish if I just give you a quote from a paper that came out 2 or 3 weeks ago, and that will sort of set the frame, and then, if there's still time, I'll try and answer the question. Okay. So this is a peer-reviewed paper from Henje, and it's a big environmental scientific journal. It says, if warming reaches or exceeds 2 degrees centigrade this century, mainly richer humans will, notice, will be responsible for killing, not the death, killing roughly 1 billion mainly poorer humans. So I talked to, dare I say it, Nick Robinson this morning, and I read that out to him. Is that what he's called? You know, that BBC guy. I spent the whole interview trying to get him to cry, but he didn't, because the first thing we need to understand about the elites, no disrespect to Isaac, is they're mainly psychotic. I think that's the correct medical word for people who are fully aware that we're going into an era of mass death and pretend that we're still in 1950. So that's the problem. As far as sort of answering the question is concerned, I'll just put my cards on the table, which is, as many of you might know, I'm a revolutionary. That means I'm a revolutionary, by the way. What that means is I foresee that the present political regime, in other words, the British Constitution, the British Parliament, which embeds the power of the British establishment, will not exist in the near term, not in the next 10 years, at some point, in the next 10 to 15 years, maybe next year. I mean, we're potentially going over 2 degrees next February, in case you didn't know. I want to say that I don't actually think revolutions are a great idea. You know, in a perfect world, we could all get together as nice, sensible people in Bristol and sort everything out in about 2 hours, couldn't we? But we know that we don't live in that world, and the elites will not change their trajectory towards taking us to mass death. And they will collapse under the weight of that contradiction. In other words, capitalism, whatever you think of it, whether you think it's good or bad, it's already destroyed itself. And what was the question?
The question was, where, if everything goes well, if you achieve your goals, and we're 10 years in the future, what does the world look like?
Well, if everything goes well, it's going to be very exciting. In a certain Nietzschean sense. I'm glad some people have read Nietzsche. What I mean to say is I think there's been a lot of repression in the Green movement, and that repression has increased exponentially over the last 10 or 20 years, where people have been desperate holding on to a reformist pathway to change. And increasingly and exponentially, people are realizing that's simply not going to happen. There's going to be a big rupture. And that's an analytical point, right? It's not an ideological point. And the default position, as hopefully Zach might want to comment on it, is a move towards extreme right-wing, popularist, racist, fascistic movements, as happened in the 1930s. However, what I'd like to say to audiences is that, I'll stop in a minute, by the way, don't panic. What I'd like to say to audiences is that that is not deterministic. Historically, it is possible for movements to resist that default descent into fascism when major crises happen. And I think that's what is coming down the road presents us with a massive opportunity to create a pro-social world. But we're going to have to work at it a lot. And I can talk about that more, but I feel I've said enough, so I'll stop.
I'm going to put that to Zach as well. I think what I'd like to come back to after, if that's all right, both of you, is that I found two things interesting about that. One, that he doesn't describe himself as a revolutionary. And second, that I think it is quite hard for Roger to describe what the world looks like beyond this sort of great change that you're trying to achieve. And is that a valid criticism of movements like Just Stop Oil? But first, Zach, would you like to tell us?
So I'm going to try and resist the temptation to respond too much, because there's so much there to respond to, much of which I agree, not all. I agree, obviously, as I suspect most people here do, that we are on a cataclysmic trajectory. And it's very hard to see anyone really convincingly argue against that. We saw the State of Nature report just a couple of days ago, which related to the UK, not globally, but the story is true globally, even if it's particularly bleak here in the UK. But in the last 10 years, we've gone from a situation where 1 in 10 of our species faced extinction, potentially, to 1 in 6. That's 10 years. That wouldn't even qualify as a blip from an evolutionary point of view. So this is happening very, very, very quickly, and the same is true all around the world. So in terms of the catastrophe, obviously, I would just agree with everything wholeheartedly, that even if I'm am I a psychopathic politician? I don't know. But whatever it is, I can tell you that this is something, that's an area where there'll be no disagreement. It's the reason I get up every morning. It's the reason I work. It's the reason I do what I do. I believe that the future that we need to hope for, whether it's 10 years or thereabouts, is one, crudely speaking, where we have reconciled our economy, our way of life, our culture, our choices, the way we live our lives with the natural world on which we all fundamentally depend. That is the outcome we want. That relates to carbon emissions, but even more importantly, it relates to consumption. All the stuff on this table here comes with a huge ecological footprint. Every item of clothing, pretty much, without exception in this room, there are a few exceptions, comes with a huge ecological footprint. So I would like us to get to a point where, just in living our lives, each and every one of us in this room is part of the solution, not the problem. Today, despite all the good intentions that we all have, we are all, in one way or another, unwillingly, in some case unknowingly, certainly not intentionally, part of the problem. The ecological footprint of this room, everyone in it, the choices you've made today, the food you've eaten, is catastrophic. And that is not your fault any more than it's our fault here on this panel. It's because the system requires it. The system guarantees that every choice we make is an ecological disaster. So I would like to see systemic change. And for that, I don't see that happening as a consequence. This is where we'll part company. I don't see that happening as a consequence of revolution. There will be an authority, whether it's this government or the next government or an entirely new government that doesn't yet exist. There will always be decision-making processes. And my very strong view, maybe not surprisingly, given that I've been in politics for 15, 20 years, is that governments have an enormously important role to play in getting us from where we are now to where we need to be. Trade agreements that Helena was talking about this morning, they don't write themselves. They're written by governments. Yes, with huge impact, influence, and control by giant corporate interests around the world, but the letters, the documents are signed by politicians. And so to the regulatory system which allows the kind of contamination that we're becoming all too familiar with in this country, in our waters, our riverways, and so on. So I think governments have an enormously important role to play. There are examples around the world of governments getting it right. There is no one government getting it all right, but almost everything that needs to be done is being done by a government, a country, a community somewhere in the world. If we could find a way to bring those inspiring examples together under one umbrella, under one system, then I think we can be optimistic about the future. We don't have to imagine new things. We know what the solutions are. We know how to get to where we need to get to. We just need to translate the kind of passion that comes from the protests that we're increasingly seeing around the world into political decisions. I think the protest is essential. If politicians don't feel the pressure, we won't get the right decisions, but ultimately governments are going to have to make those decisions. So that, I guess, is where we part company.
Two questions off the back of that. Could you give one or two examples of governments or communities somewhere that are getting it right?
Yeah.
And when you say it's not going to come from revolution but from the ballot box, will that or could that include a Tory government?
God, okay. I mean, look, I'm going to do it the other way around. No, I won't. I'm going to answer it in the order in which you asked. So, as I said, I will name governments, but in doing so, just the small print, I'm not saying that those governments have got it all right. They might be monstrous in other regards. But right now, today, we have a process. It's far too slow, but it is happening in Brazil, where land rights of indigenous communities are beginning to be recognized as a consequence of the last election. President Lula recognizes the importance. Again, not nearly enough has been done. He's going to run out of time in 2 or 3 years, but if he fulfills the promise he's made, there will be vast amounts of Amazon which will be restored to indigenous communities who we know are a critical part of the solution. That's an example of something that's happening that's right. In Costa Rica, you can buy agricultural commodities, almost any type of agricultural commodity, and you can know that when you do so, there is no direct link between those commodities and deforestation. They have broken that link. It's the only country to have done so. You can buy timber in Gabon, and you can know that the Gabonese, as a result of endless decisions, routine decisions by the government, have broken the link between timber, logging, and deforestation. There is no net deforestation in Gabon. Their forests are healthier than almost any other country in West Africa, and yet they are the contribution to their economy of the timber sector, the number of people that are employed in that sector is going up almost exponentially. There are Maldives. If you catch tuna from the Maldives, it's the only country in the world which only allows the capture of tuna with a single line, single hook, single string. No nets, no trawling, none of that stuff. Inherently, you know that if you're buying tuna from the Maldives, that tuna is good in terms of jobs, local economy, local, I guess I hate the term economic development, and also sustainability. There are many examples, but none of them, there's not a single government in the world that is getting it all right. It was a very long-winded answer. Do you really want me to answer the Tory one?
Yeah, that's really good. Carry on.
Tory one?
Yeah.
Tory
one. We all want the Tory
really
one, don't we?
Tory one?
Yeah.
Look, first of all, I'm going to say I'm not a tribal politician. I didn't join the Conservative Party because I woke up and felt that is absolutely the party for me. At the time, the party was even weaker than it is today on environmental issues. But I think every mainstream party, whether or not they have their day, whether or not they're replaced by some kind of revolutionary process, which may well happen, but they are nevertheless the mainstream parties of today, and any mainstream political party that has any prospect of achieving power has to have a comprehensive answer to what is the biggest challenge our species has ever faced. The Conservative Party had no response at all when I signed up, and I took it upon myself, it may sound quite pompous, but I wasn't the only person, to try and weave a green thread, if you can call it that, through the Conservative Party. And in some areas we succeeded, in other areas I absolutely didn't succeed. What has enraged me, particularly in the last month or two, is that we've seen a very radical shift by the party away from what were some quite progressive steps over the last few years, particularly in the international community, where the UK has been a leader in terms of the international environment and even climate change. And that's the reason I'm no longer a minister, and it's the reason I've become probably unhelpfully a pain in the arse for the current government. But I will continue to do so until we rediscover some kind of common sense.
Thank you. Roger, if there isn't going to be a revolution and change has to inevitably involve the ballot box, do you ever worry that Just Stop Oil might inadvertently make a Tory election at the next, a Tory win at the next election more likely? I say that because when Extinction Rebellion first started out, I don't think any major party had a net zero commitment. After Extinction Rebellion, they all did. But that raising of the alarm, some would argue, has become a bit of a car alarm in the street that won't go off. And do you sometimes worry that things like the recent by-election in Uxbridge, was it, where it was fought almost exclusively on ULEZ, and it was a surprise win for the Tories? Do you worry that that might be replicated at the next election if environmental policies become, so unpopular that people sort of do a knee-jerk reaction towards Rishi Sunak's no 7 recycling bins type made-up policies?
Well, I was hoping to answer a different question. So I'm sorry about that. The title of this talk is System Change, and it's a very good idea to talk about details, and that's my day job, the different dynamics of campaigning and what have you. But what we're supposed to be talking tonight about is system change. And system change, by definition, is about looking at the whole system and how systems change and transform themselves. So I'd like to address that because I think both of you have made various assumptions about how revolutionary change happens, which is not sociologically robust, as you might say. So I just want to make 2 corrections. The first correction is that revolutions are arguably initiated by conservatives, historically. And the reason is because the system itself has become revolutionary in the sense that it has become destructive of the core connectivities of society. It's destroying society through its own power lust. So, for instance, in the 19th centuries, when those revolutions in France in 1830 and 1848, a lot of the people wanted to go back, in inverted commas, to a traditional small-scale agrarian society, and they were having a revolution against the power of capital in the 19th century. So this is one of the reasons I have no problem particularly in sharing a platform with Zach, because there's elements of conservatism which are radically opposed to the power of international capital. And the revolution is against the revolutionary violence of international capital. So there's a complexity and ambiguity in the word revolution, if you understand what I'm trying to say. The second thing is a revolution does not tear down the state. The revolution can reconstruct and does reconstruct the state from a regime that is destroying the state. And if you listen to that quote, you shouldn't have that much problem imagining how states are going to destroy themselves in the context of 1,000 million people dying. After all, that's the equivalent of 20 World War IIs in the next 2 generations. So what we need to focus on is a project that is going to bring together what you might call traditional conservatism with traditional progressivism against the real enemy, which is international capital. International capital is obviously a simplification and there's all sorts of different dynamics. But what I would suggest concretely this looks like is the creation of political forces that do not want to stand in elections to recreate the party system, but want to remove the party system and replace it with citizens' assemblies. That's the international agenda amongst people that are thinking clearly, I would suggest, about the problem in this country, but also around the whole Western world, which I spend half my time on Zoom calls with, dare I say it. So, I've forgotten what your question is now.
That's fine, because I think Zach wanted to respond to what you were saying, so let's go with that.
Thank you very much. I mean, the thing is, you're talking about people, whether it's Conservative Party or Labour Party or a mishmash of other parties or a citizen assembly, these are people. They will face, whoever they are, whatever party they belong to, they will face the same pressure that I experienced as a minister of vested interest trying to shape policy. And that vested interest is enormously powerful. I saw that in relation to so many different areas where I was personally pushing in one direction, and I felt the weight of corporate interest pushing in the other. In some cases, we were able to get stuff through. In other cases, that vested interest prevailed. But whoever's in charge is going to face that same pressure. And I guess maybe when you're talking about systemic change, you and I have a different view of what systemic means. My view is that there are things that can be done, practical things that can be done that would shift the axis of more or less everything that we know. For example, we know that around the top 50 food-producing countries in the world spend around $700 million every single year subsidizing often highly destructive land use. That's one of the reasons we are heading so fast in the wrong direction and seeing the eradication of biodiversity, of proper rural communities and so on. If you were able to agree in principle that money should not be spent on destruction, but instead should be invested in renewal of our land, of our environment, you're talking about a massive shift in the incentives that currently exist. Today, the incentive to destroy the Amazon financially is 40 times greater than the incentive to protect the Amazon. But one of the reasons for that is these subsidies. So change those subsidies. It's not the only solution, of course, but if you address the subsidy system, there's unbelievable, often invisible, but gigantic incentives which are catapulting us in the wrong direction. You know, you've spoken, I've heard you speak in the past about fossil fuel subsidies. The same is true for fishing subsidies, almost every penny of which is not about supporting fishing communities and jobs and coastal development and so on. It is about the huge industrial fishing fleets, often international fishing fleets, which are responsible for hoovering life out of the ocean at a rate which we know the ocean can't sustain. So when I talk about systemic change, these are actual policies which can be shifted with enough pressure on enough governments, enough politicians, enough governments, officials. You can shift the axis. And we know that there are governments already signed up to that agenda. They can't do it on their own. It requires international agreement. There are people around the world applying that pressure very effectively to more reluctant governments. And we know that it is, you can see the light at the end of that tunnel. If we were to focus on that, for example, just eradication and redirection of those nightmarishly destructive subsidies, we'd have a huge impact. It should not be possible for money to flow through the City of London into projects which are destroying, for example, Borneo or Papua or Brazil or Colombia or wherever. Natural ecosystems, and yet it is today. What is the answer to that? Well, you can regulate. It is possible. There are examples of this happening. It is possible for governments. Again, I think they're better off working in partnership with other governments as well, not on their own. It's difficult because of the sheer power of these vested interests. It is possible to ensure through regulations that you cannot import into this country deforestation from other countries, biodiversity loss from other countries, exploitation of communities in other countries. It is possible to do that. There are examples already of that work being done. The problem, I think, is that if we just wait for some kind of revolution where we don't really know what the outcome is going to be, and if we look at the history of revolutions, there aren't, I can't think of any that have ended up in the kind of place that I personally would be comfortable with. It just feels to me that in the meantime, while we wait for that change to happen or not to happen, we should be focusing on those levers that governments actually do control, and we should be putting as much pressure as we possibly can, including through direct action, including through the kind of protests that you've engaged in, on those politicians to get those right decisions made. We know it's possible. The reason it's not happening is because the pressure we're applying, or you're applying, does not equal the pressure of vested interest on the other side. And that's the bit I think we need to focus on.
I've just seen a sign that says stop now. I'm going to carry on for a bit, if that's all right, because the discussion's just getting going, starting to get interesting. And then we could do some short questions at the end. But I think what you said is super interesting. And I think people, when they see a politician like you, I know I always felt like that. Like, I never had any doubt that you cared about the environment. But people see politicians like you who clearly are sincere in what you're saying about the environment, but change takes so long to achieve, too long to achieve, as Roger will tell you, because we'll be at the end times before we get there if we carry on like this. And perhaps you could give us some kind of insight into why that is. Why is it so hard to push against those forces that you just mentioned? What are the challenges that you found yourself up against when you were
I'm going to try not
minister?
to be repetitive, but it does come back to vested interest. So, for example, as I first became a minister, we were beginning in this country to rethink our land use subsidy system. We spent about £4 billion a year subsidizing land use. At the moment, the system is pretty perverse. You're paid for the amount of land that you have that can be farmed. If you own marshland, if you own precious biodiversity, woodland, you're not going to get any subsidies for it. Converted into farmland, even if it's low grade, you start getting paid. So the more land you own, the bigger the landowner, the more money you get, and the more destruction you do converting not very good farmland into farmland, biodiversity into farmland, the more money you get paid. So all the incentives are wrong. It's pretty much exactly the opposite of what it should be. And when we started talking about changing it so that we would have a system where that money would be paid in return for delivery of public goods, like access to the countryside for urban kids, managing land in a way that the water would be held for longer during the summer and would be released more slowly during the winter, preventing floods or drought, whatever it happens to be, not putting pesticides on the ground, which has to be cleaned out of the rivers later on. All these things which I think we'd all agree are public goods. At the time, this was kind of people nodded, it sounded interesting, it was a bit academic, but it was okay. And we got on with it. And as we got closer to the point where this was going to actually start to happen, I could feel this just colossal buildup of pushback from the National Farmers Union, from the pesticide firms, from agribusiness. And it got more and more intense. And we could see suddenly that people could imagine, not just this academic debate, but they could actually see that the money they were receiving and the kind of agriculture that they depended on for their industrial, whatever the sector they belonged to, was suddenly under threat. And the pushback was the sort that I have never seen before, intensity I've never seen before. And I saw MP after MP after MP crumbling like nettles as they were called in by their local NFU representative or whoever it happened to be and told, if you do this, you're anti-farmer. Of course, they're not anti-farmer. They're pro-land, pro-biodiversity, pro-food security, pro-genuine sustainability, just not pro-industrial food production, not pro-industrial agriculture. But the pressure on those MPs, many of whom are very feeble, was successful. And we saw MPs falling like dominoes. It wasn't a Conservative problem, it wasn't a Lib Dem or a Labour problem, it was an MP problem, being lobbied by vested interests. Very organized, very effective. To the point where suddenly the government started wobbling, being frightened. They weren't opposed by the other parties because they all felt the same pressure. And the talk was about how do we water this down? How do we water it down? And we will possibly get to a point where, because of that vested interest, and because not enough people are paying attention to this, we will probably end up with something which is a bit meaningless. We'll have a slight improvement potential in what we have, but it won't be the more radical shift that I think many environmentalists were hoping for. And I do think, I'm going to probably make lots of people cross, I think, probably now, but I do think that one of the reasons for that is that because this is something that was, by chance, happening under a Conservative government, people were justifiably, understandably, angry with that government for all kinds of different reasons. If we ask 100 people, you'll get 100 different reasons why they were angry. So the fact that it was a Conservative government doing something really interesting, really good, with support from people across the parties, meant that people could not bring themselves to say, actually, that's a pretty good idea, that's a pretty good policy. So we heard no feedback, nothing positive from the environmental movement. And so I actually started calling environmental groups and saying, for God's sake, if you don't put pressure on now, they're not going to feel any warm glow of public approval for doing something which requires quite a lot of courage, but they're going to still feel the backlash from the other side. And to their credit, a number of environmental groups and advocates, some very radical, did step up and did say this is actually a pretty good thing to do. But my worry is that not enough, and that balance I talked about earlier between vested interest on the one hand, people on the other, was tipped in the wrong way. And last point, but just if I can, you asked a while ago, Roger, about his worry about whether or not green policies are unpopular. I've commissioned quite a few polls myself. I've digested many, many polls. I have never seen an opinion poll, a survey, a focus group, anything of the sort, of any constituency, anywhere in the country, or any type of person in the country, any age group, where a clear majority haven't coming back saying they want more biodiversity, more access to nature, more closeness to nature. They want more climate leadership. This is a popular agenda. It only becomes unpopular when we allow the opponents, often vested interests, to reduce this whole agenda, which is essentially about whether or not we continue to live in harmony with the planet that we depend on, down to one policy, ULEZ, or something like that, which is very easy to turn into a kind of bogeyman. And we mustn't allow that. We need to maintain control of the language, the story. Otherwise, I think we will lose, and we will suffer as a result.
It sounds really fucking difficult and a nightmare trying to do anything of any meaning. But Roger, how does a People Assembly look like, and how is it any better than that? Because I've been on some of those Zoom meetings you're talking about, and it's like 4 hours of Doris from Hove and Phil from Hempstead talking about what plastic to laminate a sign with that will have least impact on the environment. Like, it's almost like a deluge of democracy that just stops anything happening. Aren't there problems? What is this People's Assembly, and how is it better? You've been there.
The serious point here, just to stop everyone laughing, is if we don't get organised, we're going to have fascism, okay? And fascism is not good, if you hadn't noticed. Go and read something about it. it's massively violent, it's massively ugly, it's massively destructive. And in the modern context, it will lead to human extinction because it hasn't got any universal rationality. So it's easy to make a joke of popular democracy because it's messy and it has ordinary people with their different, quirks. But that's all we've got as Democrats, assuming we are Democrats, right? We've only got the people. And what we have to do is what's called construct the people. We have to bring people together with our best social processes and enable them to feel their power. And we've had 30, 40 years of the neoliberal lie that people can't organize themselves. They're not interested, and we have to leave it to the NGOs and the political parties, and we know where that's led. To the point where only 8% of the people in this country believe in the present constitutional arrangements, right? This country is as mad as hell, if you hadn't noticed. It's just we're just being polite and English about it. But underneath, we're all mad as hell because we've just totally been fucked over year after year. And only in the last fortnight, we've suffered the astronomical humiliation of a prime minister committing himself to genocide on our watch. So, yes, it is going to be really difficult. It's going to be hellishly difficult. And so we all have to grow up a bit and realize that if only 3 people turn up to your first Bristol assembly, you just stride on, right? Because you haven't got any other choice. When we started Extinction Rebellion, there were 2 of us doing mobilization. My friend Robin had the west side of Britain and I had the east side. That's how it started. The first meeting I went to, I rang my mate up and said, hey, I want to go to Nottingham, it's a cool place. Can you get some people in the room because we want to have a rebellion against the British government? And said, fantastic, I'll get all my friends. It turned up and there was him and 1 friend, right? Don't think there's anything glamorous about starting Extinction Rebellion. Everyone thought it was like a twatty idea for at least 3 months, right? And then 6 months after that, it had 200,000 people and everyone thought it was cool, right? That's how history works. Everyone thinks you're a twat and then suddenly you're a hero, right? That's how it works. So what I'm asking you all to do is to realize, right, we're on the edge of hell, and we all need to get a grip. We all need to work together, and we need to create assemblies around this country to revitalize the democracy of this country. And those assemblies need to aggregate into bigger assemblies, and they need to show their power through local direct action, through coming up with national manifestos, through standing as independents in elections, right? And everyone needs to work together constructively to prepare for the revolutionary episode that's coming down the road, whether we like it or not, okay? Because at some point, the system is going to destroy itself for the reasons Zach's explained, because vested interests are destroying our state and society. And we need to be prepared for it so that when that moment comes, the forces of fascism cannot destroy everything we believe in. And we need to start now. Nothing could be more serious, you know?
I'm going to jump in. I know we're going to come to questions. I want to say that I agree with, I think, everything that Roger just said. I agree with you in terms of the scale of the problem. I agree with you that people need to organize and mobilize. I don't think we'll see politicians making the right decisions unless people mobilize, and that's how you balance that vested interest that comes from the other side. I believe in direct democracy. I tried introducing bills in Parliament as a backbench MP for direct democracy at the local, regional, national level. I fully support everything you said. But ultimately, this is about making sure that the right decisions are made by whoever is in government at the time. And that will never happen until you balance the power of vested interest with the power of people. And that's where I think we've sort of done a circle. I feel very comfortably. I'm not too embarrassed to be next to you at this moment, Roger.
Well, look, this is the glorious thing about British culture, isn't it? Will this be happening in France? You know, let's get a bit patriotic about it, right? You know, I'm sitting next to a Tory MP and I haven't thrown water over him. I did have this stick just in case it came to blows. But seriously speaking, right, you know, this country, you know, has got massive, massive problems, and it's got a very problematic history, let's put it like that. But at the same time, you know, looking on the bright side, there's a lot of common sense, right? And that's what we need. We need a common sense revolution, where we say, we're not putting up with all this bollocks, right? You know, that's the language we need to use. This is, quite possibly. Yeah, quite possibly. Anyway, the upshot of it is, you know, being a practical guy, hopefully you've got my email address and you can email me, and there are assemblies happening around the UK, and I'm involved in trying to aggregate them and get people to work together. We've got Rupert on the front row here thinking, you know, what he's going to do with me and everything, but we're all going to work together, and we are going to build something. And I'm working with a bunch of, you know, relatively rich people. Obviously, I'll be asking Zach for the odd million or two after this meeting, because obviously he's a patriotic guy and wants to see the country survive. But, you know, talk about that later. But the point is let's get going, right? We know what we need to do. We need to build another mass movement like XR, where XR 2.0, which is well organized, dare I say it, with a central committee. Sorry for those of you who don't like central committees, but that's the way you get things on the go. That's why Just Stop Oil is 90% name recognition, because it's properly organized. And we're going to go out and we're going to become a voice in the public sphere of this country. And it's desperately needed, because the Labour Party's fucked, isn't it? Right? Let's be honest with ourselves. You know, it's gone into the depths of Mordor. Is that right? It has, hasn't it? I mean, what is that guy? Is he alive? I'm 57, you know. Who's in their 50s here? We've had, 50 years of the Labour Party lying to us. Really, you know, it's done. That story's done. We need a new story in this country of common mobilisation and organisation, bottom up. And this is the last thing I need to say to you guys, right? The Green Movement's really good at making wish lists, aren't you? Right? No disrespect. We need this, we need that. That's not working. If only we had this. It's all bollocks, right? What we need to concentrate on is the aggregation of political power, right? That's the chicken that lays the golden egg. And that's what you saw with Extinction Rebellion. That's what you're seeing at the moment with Just Stop Oil. The reason why you know about us is because we're powerful. We're powerful because we disrupt. That's one part of the strategy, right? Nothing's going to happen without disruption, as we all know, or we should know. The other side of the strategy is popular mobilization in local communities. And it's the synergy between the two that provides the possibility of collective redemption, right? And we've got 3 minutes left. So, you know, you've got 3 minutes to redeem yourselves. All right? So send me an email, because I'm a mobilizer. Thanks.
Can we go on, or do we need to stop? We can't go on. Okay, so I was going to open it up for questions, but unfortunately...
We can go on, can't we? Come on, people. We can stay to 8. You see that?
5 more minutes
5 more
we have.
minutes.
Shall we open it up for
popular pressure
one
in
question, or
action.
should we just do closing comments from these two, who seem to have much more in common than I think any of us realised before we came in? They both hate Labour. They both are not into vested interests. And they both believe we're better than the French, which is a good thing. But should we do some closing sort of... Is there anything you want to sort of wrap it up by saying, either of you?
God, that's quite tough. We've covered a lot of ground. I'm going to say that, well, first of all, thank you for sharing this. Roger, flattered that you shared a platform with me. I'm here, a peer of the realm, sitting next to a man with a jail collar on his ankle. And is that what that is? It is, isn't it? I thought so. And I think we have found a lot of common ground. I think we might argue about some of the strategies, some of the bits on the way to what I think is essentially the same outcome, and that's an outcome where we live at a human scale. We take back control from international vested interest that has completely deformed our politics, our environment, the air that we breathe, the water we drink, and that we reconcile ourselves with the natural world. We know how to do it. There are people already all around the world, the majority of them are indigenous communities. They have been doing this ever since time began. And I think there's a lesson there to be learned for us. We had that right at the beginning when Helena gave us her introduction, and we had that wonderful discussion between Helena and Dolma. There's an enormous amount to be learned from Helena, from her book, Ancient Futures. If you haven't read it, there are piles of them outside. Everyone in this room needs to read it and then give it to someone else and get them to read it and do the same. It has been a real pleasure, and I would just, my final point of this rambling concluding remark is that I think no matter how bleak things are, and things are pretty bleak and get bleaker by the day, we know what needs to be done. We don't need to be clever. We don't need to be particularly imaginative. We just need to push and push and push so that those little islands of best practice become the norm rather than the exception. I asked Satish earlier whether he was optimistic, and he said, well, of course, you can't be an activist if you're not optimistic. Otherwise, you're just going to go and retire, have a party, go to sleep. And he's absolutely right. So I think the very fact that you're all here at this conference is a sign that there is at least some optimism in you. And I think it's absolutely essential that we hold on to that.
Thank you, everyone. I think we have to wrap that up. But thank you to Zach. Another round of applause. And thank you to Roger. Thank you, Helena, for organising. Thanks very much.
Can I just say something? I broke my leg, by the way, but I am coming to Bristol again, so hopefully the people who organised this can let you know. And when I come to Bristol again, I'd love for you all to come and hear me, because there is a plan, okay? I'm not just saying that to impress you. There is a plan. I managed to be able to say it very much because, don't want to, be impolite to Zach. But if you'd like to come, you'd be very welcome. And yeah, please tell people. Thank you very much.
here. I can sit in the middle of it. Just because it's hard for her to see the number. Okay. The timing. Okay.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hello. Good evening.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Good evening. Well, that's a hard act to follow, I think. Thank you. So this is a session on something very different, changing gears from what we've been talking about. And I hope now in the evening we're going to be kind of tying together in this session a lot of the themes we've been talking about all day. Namely, we're talking about the still, the small, the connected, and the slow, and how we can integrate that into this bigger shift that we all want to see. My name is Bill Powers. I am the author of numerous books, including the best-selling 12 by 12, a one-room cabin off the grid and beyond the American dream. I'm also a professor, and I have a permaculture farm in Bolivia, and a lot of other things which we're going to talk about. And I'm really excited to present the other two panelists this evening. We've had a chance to connect. Thais Mantovani is from Brazil. She's come all the way up, and she is an amazing, inspiring activist in doing work with indigenous people and post-capitalism and other topics in Brazil after a stint at Schumacher College. So she'll be sharing with us on the topic of slow, small, and connected. And then Eva Henje, who is a psychiatrist specializing in adolescence in Sweden, also a professor there, and we're really excited to jump right into it this evening. And, you know, I think that just to begin with, this topic is obviously more of a personal, intimate type of a topic because we're talking about the underlying philosophy of life and worldview at the individual level first. Second, the family and collective level, like how we integrate this type of perspective into our communities. And finally, the all-important structural level, which is a lot of what we've been talking about. So how do we do this? It's a big open-ended question that everyone will have different answers for. So let's go ahead and begin here with Thais.
Thank you so much. Well, it's wonderful to be here with you. As Bill said, I'm from Brazil, so I'm going to give a bit of a perspective, of Latin American perspective. We have been speaking throughout the day. It was lovely to meet Eva and Bill and get to chat before the session. One of the things that most stayed with me from our conversations around slow, small, and connected is the principles that this brings to our lives, right? So when we live in modernity, which is fast-paced, it is huge scale, and you're not able to know who is the person who lives next to you, or even truly know the person who works with you, and just this rapid way that society works, that you need to be productive 100% of the time, takes out your quality of life. And I'm super happy to see Eva speak a bit about mental health and how this affects our way of being in the world, like the quality and the present that we're here. And the intervention that we do in the world, like what we want to put out as good actions that we are all here to do, is proportionate to the quality that we have inside of us and the principles that we're cultivating inside of us. So when we talk about being slow, small, and connected, we are talking about relationships of trust, being able to trust each other. And this comes with time. This comes with building quality relationships. This comes from knowing each other and feeling whole and feeling community. And this is something that for a modern person who lives in a big city, it's not very common, not even in our families today. So when we're experience different type of cultures, and Bill said I've been working with indigenous communities, and I just came from the Amazon literally 2 weeks ago. I was living with an indigenous community. They received me in their family home. There are no such things as a hotel in an indigenous community. There's no such thing as transactional relationships. We are all relatives, we're all family. And this is a completely new way of thinking and relating that might not be so common to modernity. And I think that the localization and the local movement, what we're doing here today, we are connecting to each other. We are listening to each other. We are understanding the experiences that we share, the principles and the values that we share. We are stopping our busy lives outside and coming to this space and looking into each other's eyes and being like, I share the same principles as you. I want to walk in the same direction that you're walking. And while I came from another part of the world, just to see you guys and to be with you guys and understand that I'm going back home and I'm still going to promote localization, the local movement, community, a human scale, trusted relationships, interconnectedness within my community. And I see myself as a privileged woman. I have gone through, well, I don't know if that is privileged, but I've gone through educational systems. I've graduated in college. I had the opportunity to go to Schumacher College, where Satish was here, such a great mentor, where I met Helena too. So I've had opportunities, but at the same time, modernity has also, in a sense, destroyed a few parts of myself as well. And the connectedness of who I am and what I want to do in the world. So I've worked in marketing and advertisement before I changed my life. And that was when I had a super rapid, hectic lifestyle. And I didn't even stop to think what I was doing, right? And I think most of our friends and colleagues might be in the same place. And just rushing after the story of success. So how can we come back home and hospice, sustain space for what is dying? Because we know that this narrative of success cannot live long enough, right? It's killing ourselves. It's probably not killing the planet. The planet's going to exist after we're gone, but it's destroying our society. So how can we hospice a space for a way of being that it's dying? And I think Daniel Wall was speaking about that earlier this morning. And hold space for transformational and the change that we want to see in the world in a quick way, right? In a rapid way, because we need to spread this as much as we can so that we make it in time. So thank you so much for listening.
Okay, thank you, Thijs. Eva?
So hello, and thank you for staying here this hour after so many words that have been said to integrate and think about. On the topic of small and slow and connected, I would say that those are the actual antidote to the mental health effects that we see as part of the meta-crisis. The dominant culture want us to speed up, to produce more, to feed that whole process, and is actually an act of resistance to do the opposite. And by that, we create a new fabric and a cohesion in local communities that makes us less vulnerable to the stresses that we are exposed to. And I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, so I come from within the systems. I come from mental health, I come from academia, and I know about the dominant paradigm, how we understand mental health from there. And I think I'm here to try to offer a different perspective to contribute to rewrite the story regarding mental health. In my world, the youth mental health crisis we have today, post-COVID pandemic, 25% of the global young people suffering from clinical depression, and suicide is the most common cause for for mortality in teenage girls. And this is a predicted outcome. This is something that is not surprising, and it's deeply linked to the meta crisis. So if we set the stage that way and then look at our human and mammal biology that has a certain rhythm, and the systems we live in try to override that. And if we get activated, if power structures are threatening us, or if we are under extreme stress, this is specifically dangerous for the developing brain. As we were listening to this morning about the deep nesting, that can't happen. So it actually impacts our ability to self-regulate later on in life. And when there is a moderate stressor, we activate, we get the fight and flight response, we feel some anxiety, we mobilize, we take action, we do things. If the stressors become more intense, we'll reach a point of overwhelm, and the nervous system will shut down, and we will find ourselves immobilized, and if this continues, also dissociative and numbed out. And from that place, we can't create any systemic change. We can't take action. We can't just cognitively tell ourselves to take action, because this biology is keeping us entrapped in our bodies. And it's not only depression, it's eating disorders, it's abuse of different kinds, it's anxiety disorders, all of this. So it's like a whole generation is immobilized at the moment. And in psychiatry, we call this disease or disorder, and we ask, what's wrong with you? And then we prescribe medication to fix the problem. And I think this is a huge crime that needs to be addressed. I think rather we should ask what happened to you, and explain that what you're feeling is a completely normal and adequate response to the meta-crisis. And I think for my generation, I think we are also quite immobilized and dissociative, because it's very, very painful, shameful, and horrible to realize that we can't really protect our children anymore. We can't protect future generations. So I think we also need the same slow, small, connected groups to keep sane and to hold space and to help address these problems. There is no other way that I can see that we will mobilize. So I think there is a great gain to actually bridge activism with trauma response theory, and actually teach young people what dissociation is, how to get back on track, and that is possible to do within a clinical context also. That's what I'm working to do within the systems as a psychiatrist. So thank you.
Thank you, Eva. For my part, I've maybe spent the last 20 years of my life focused on this question of the small, the slow, getting those connections right in one's life as a radical act of post-capitalist action and being. I can tell you a little story, and I think it relates a little bit to what Eva was saying, and also Thijs, that in 2007, I was in that position that Eva was talking about, of feeling completely overwhelmed, stressed, depressed from overworking. I was an activist, a writer, working on the same issues that we're all working on, but 24/7. You know, can anyone relate to that? You know, that kind of like workaholism and so forth. It got so bad that my wife and I, and this is almost embarrassing to say, we took unimoons. Unimoons are separate honeymoons taken separately and tacked onto work trips. Yes, unimoons. You know, because it's just when you're doing this. So what happened? I reached a kind of a crisis where I realized a lot of my work with biodiversity, with helping indigenous people or accompanying indigenous people in gaining their lands and so forth around the world, a lot of those big projects and so forth were like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. You know, the whole ship was kind of sinking. And we're doing these projects that are well-funded and so forth, but aren't achieving the kind of deeper shift that we need. And that's when I met this very inspiring North American physician named Jackie Benton. She had completely decolonized her life. And I heard about her, and because I'm a writer, I got curious and went and met her and interviewed her. And you know that she actually sold her house, or she was renting, I believe, and she moved into a 12-foot by 12-foot tiny off-grid house in an intentional community, linked to Habitat for Humanity projects, other tiny housers, permaculture. A whole new world opened for me when I saw what this individual was doing in terms of lowering her salary to $12,000 a year as a form of tax resistance. You don't have to pay money to the Pentagon if you make less than a certain amount. It's probably similar in the UK. So inspired by her, I didn't go and move into a 12 by 12 myself, but I did ask myself, like, what's my 12 by 12? In this era of meta-crisis and depression individually and just trauma societally, and what can I do that's similar to what Jackie Benton was doing, or at least some way relates to it? And so what I did was, you know, I met this amazing person who shares similar values. We had kids. We moved to Bolivia, where we both worked for many years through the early 2000s. 10 years ago, we moved full-time to a tiny community of 5,000, where the Amazon meets the Andes in eastern Bolivia. We're in this town. We have a 6-acre plot. We do permaculture. My university students that I teach come down and get involved with indigenous people working. We are dedicated to the ideas of Arturo Escobar and a lot of the people that we've been talking about at this meeting. Real deep stuff, change, this kind of change. And I think for me, I would not be doing this and could not do this if it didn't come from that place of connection with nature, deep ecology and a lived basis. For example, with our kids, we're not parenting, we're childing. We're working with them, we're accompanying them, we're watching them play. They are completely tied to nature. They're in sort of a homeschooling cooperative that we have, and just the amount that I learn from them every day and how it energizes me. Or the way that we're in a transition town. We co-founded a transition town in Bolivia in 2014, 2015, and we've been linking up internationally with other communities. That's how I got linked up with Schumacher College originally and so forth. And at a community level, you know, there's just so many free things that are happening all the time. You know, we're linking up not just through the school cooperative, but also through you know, monthly sort of new moon celebrations with men's circles and with singing circles. Someone was talking about singing this morning, and all of these things that we're doing. So I just can't tell you like the amount of healing, deep healing that takes place individually, as a community, and even in some ways on these bigger structural levels, when you touch those spaces that are small, simple, slow, you know, and you begin to integrate that in, that is nature working through you, right? It's like that is what happens when you become decolonized from anthropocentric ways of looking at things, and you become part of nature. Another thing somebody said this morning is that we're not owners of the land is working through us. And that's what begins to happen, and that is mental health for me. So that's what I'd like to say. Thank you. Okay, so where do you all want to go with that? I mean, here we are. I think I was very interested in nesting, the concept that we talked about earlier, and this more comprehensive paradigm of children and individuation and so forth. Maybe could you talk a little bit about what you think about that, or how we should be like approaching families and...
Well, I think from a biology point of view, it's absolutely necessary to have the nesting process for secure attachment to develop and for the brain to develop its connections and for a person to create a nervous system that is resilient. And what we see today is just the lack of that. The lack of opportunity for families and parents to create those conditions. And that brings along the pandemic of mental health problems in youth. And then the question is, how can we repair that from that stage if we lost the opportunity? Of course, it's always better to work with prevention, but we also at the same time need to repair what has been broken. And it's possible. It's just that you need to work small and slow and connected and create safe spaces where people can relive their traumatic experiences and integrate them in new ways in their brain so they don't become constant triggers for emotional pain. It's completely possible, but that's not the dominant paradigm's agenda. That's rather to put the guilt on the individual that it's something wrong with you. You're not feeling well. This is a disease. Instead of looking at the systems we live in and address those. So the nesting is essential, really, really important. That's where it begins, in the womb, actually.
Okay, and
or
then,
even further back.
Before that as well, right? And moving forward a little bit in life, let's say here you both, I mean, how do you integrate the small, the slow, and the connected into your own lives? And how does that power your work and activism and your lives? Like, can you just talk a little bit about that, just to share?
Yes, sure. Well, I'm not going to be very romantic about it. It's a polarity for me. At the same time that it's something to cultivate. The world is pushing towards another direction all the time. So even though we work with regeneration, local economies, sustainability, the way that we're working, it's rapid and it's on your computer all the time and you need to be producing all the time. And it's just the same way creating this new narratives, but doing it in the same way. So what I'm trying to consciously do every day is just ask myself, how am I doing things and what am I doing? And are they connected to place? Are they based on relationships of trust? Are they on a human scale? Are they local? So I think this, what we were speaking before is like, are the principles on the right place? Are we understanding where we want to be and how we're doing, what we're doing and how we're doing? It's ultimately important because the world will push towards another direction, right? So this is super important to have a space of community like we're having right now to feel connected, to feel each other and being like, I am not alone in this world. And the amount of change that we need to provoke, it's a big one. It's a systemic change. So if we're trying to do policy change, for example, which I think we should be all striving for and somehow, it's a big work, and the politics and the governments, especially in Brazil, will be pushing towards another direction. So it's a constant balance between holding on your principles and understanding where you have to go towards creating change. Because change needs to be held by all of us in our local spaces. But how are we going to do this? It's the most important space.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Eva, did you have any thoughts on that? Or?
So the question is, again,
how are you integrating this kind of perspective? You know, like, for example, do you remember Vananda Shiva this morning on the video calling in? Did you see behind her were the trees? And at one point she pointed up at the trees and just gave that metaphor of like how the trees drop their fruits into the soil grows and reconnects. Like, it was just so obvious to me that she is embodying completely a kind of biocentrism in her life, and it's just fueling her sense of joy and happiness. You know, so I'm just sort of asking how you do that in your own life.
So I think it's a practice often of interoceptive awareness, of actually feeling into my own body on a present moment basis and notice when I'm talking too quickly or when my cognitive mind goes astray and drive my behavior, and then come back to moving my feet or feeling my breath or attune to the surroundings that I'm in. And notice also if I go into dissociative states myself and come back and stay connected, cultivate close relationships to not too many people at the same time, and keep it small. Yes, and I think these are the practices that we can work with to treat and to prevent mental health as well. It's like the same, it's quite generic. It's about the human and animal. I mean, it's basic principles that we are constantly overriding. So it's not that rocket science to practice these skills of coming back, coming in, checking in. So I think it's also I try to look at it I describe it as an 8. So sometimes we need to go in and get challenged and hyper-stressed, and we are made to do that. That's not anything wrong, but then we need to rest, we need to come back. And the problem is if you have too much trauma in your system, it's very difficult to rest, because as soon as you're not hyperactivated, then what's being dissociated or exiled, that will emerge, and then the anxiety will increase. So I think this is also not often addressed, that it's not so easy to rest if you're in that kind of situation. So that's important to know. Yeah.
Right, and that can be done wherever you are, right? In the city, in the countryside, it doesn't really matter. Some of my students will ask, well, you know, what do I do in the middle of a busy semester or with everything going on? Well, there's so many things. One is like just even looking up. Yeah. Just look up, whatever's going on around you. Look at the 3rd story in Bristol, look at the trees above you, maybe you'll see a red-tailed hawk landing, the clouds going over. Just looking up, we have that to access at any moment to get into this sort of smaller and slower perspective. And the other thing is just touch something natural wherever you are. Lean against a tree, as the eco-philosopher David Abrams says, just lean against a tree and just feel that. You know, there's so many things that we can do just right to touch, like into the textures, smell, sense, our sensory perceptions in our daily life. How does this all connect with what would a world look like if more people were in this connected, small and slow paradigm? How would that affect the bigger structures, or is there not even a connection there? Like, what can we bridge the gap between, say, these practices which are sort of mindfulness practices and transition communities and families and so forth, and then how does that connect with that larger level?
Well, I think the thing to look out for is to be aware when things get individual or spiritual bypass. If that quality comes into it, it's never going to do any difference. So in this practice, we also need to understand what's going on in the world. So it's a constant practice of trying to position oneself in the ongoing crisis, and to take action from that point. And to be able to do that, we need to know how to self-regulate. So I think, you know, ideally we would have localized little communities where people were living well nested and happy. And it seems like a utopia at this moment, because so very few of us can apply that in our lives. And then the question comes, how should we operate? Should we try to create parallel societies where that is possible to model the new? Or should we try to remain within the systems and be Trojan horses in there and try to change the paradigms within the systems? I don't have the answer to that. I think I see of this as a big mandala where all actions are needed, just with this basic understanding of what's going on. So I think it's really hard to answer that. It's I don't know what it would be like.
Yeah. I think with our rational minds, we tend to choose either or. Yes. But I love how you bring it's both. There is this work around decolonization, which is the gesture towards decolonization futures. It's a collective of artists and educators that work around decolonization with indigenous people, and they work around cartographies and metaphors for life. And they have this metaphor which is called the pile of shit, and it's all about composting. So how do you compost the shit of the system, right? How do you create a space for that to decompose and become food for the ground, for the soil, for nature, for transformation. And it's both and. So in this cartography, you have the pile of shit and us sitting on top of it, and you have the rainbow on the other side, being like this future that we are creating. So do you run off towards the rainbow and being like, I'm going to live in this eco-community and experience this other way of being in life and territory, which is more local and all the values that we're speaking? Yes. But do I have to go back and compost the shit because it's going to invade my rainbow some way or someday? Also. So how can we be nested and embraced in our communities, but also come back to modernity and compost the shit? So I think this is our big mission for this generation, this transition.
Excellent. Wonderful, wonderful. Wow. I just have this feeling that a lot of us could benefit from dedicating, a certain amount of time to structural change, to the big change we want to see, but also a lot of time to that contemplative, that inner peace, that we just find ways, whatever ways they are, to go there. And I just feel like that would make this movement incredibly strong and more resilient and more beautiful. They say the revolution must be irresistible. We have to make it irresistible. We have to make it something that you'd want. And I feel like that's the kind of activism that I've kind of stepped into through the sort of traumatic experiences, into meeting this physician and the 12 by 12 and so forth, and the way that we've shaped our family life and culture. It's been just a beautiful process of allowing space, just allowing space, breathing, mindfulness practices like you were talking about. You can even cycle through the 5 senses in any moment in the day, like go through all 5 of your senses, plus your thoughts, your emotions, and your sense of presence. Just by doing that, the 8 kind of portals into the present moment are incredibly powerful. These are ways of changing the world on a much deeper level. I mean, this is the other kind of consciousness that Gandhi and Martin Luther King and the people Satish were mentioning this morning. This is the kind of consciousness that he's talking about and that they were talking about. Or is that too provocative? Does that?
Well, I think it's about try to create an inner space where you can hold extreme polarities and paradoxes and feel the pain deeply, and not just try to create a space where you don't have to feel everything. It's rather the opposite. It's going into it and really feel it. And to be able to do that without getting numbed out or disconnected or dissociative, we need each other. And we need to create spaces not only in eco-villages, but I think in the big cities where people are in their stressed life to have these seeds coming in and create the fabrics of that way of being.
Donna Haraway has a great book talking about staying with the trouble. So I think I agree completely with you. It's how do we stay with the troubles of the world, embrace them, and create space to collectively heal those spaces. So I think our time is over, but it was a lovely conversation.
Yes, thank you so much, and this was wonderful, and thanks so much for listening so late in the evening. We appreciate it.
So do you want to take this one?
Yeah.
You only need 2 on stage, which is wholesome.
Yeah, just 2. Going to pass baton it, so it's really
Cool. Give us a second just to readjust some shots.
Yeah, no, we'll
Oh, what number are you on?
I need this one. 2. I've got
2.
3 over there, Dave. 2.
I want 1 and 2. Sorry. Sorry about that. 1 and 2 I need, really.
1, 2.
1 and 2, because it makes sense. It makes sense to the engineer.
Alright, cool.
Cool. 1 and 2.
Franco, you're
Guys,
next.
Are you the, what's your name?
I'm Shuka. I'm introducing the musician.
Oh, cool.
Okay, yeah, you can come back. And these guys have got
Where's the popcorn?
Ella or Alice aren't here, are they? Or Rutendo. There's 2 or 3 people missing.
So what's going to be? It's going to be 2 on, 2 off. It's 1 and 2. He said have 3 and 2. What you want? You got 3 and 2. 1 and 2. That's it.
I didn't find Ella or
No,
Alice.
I don't know, she hasn't arrived yet.
Okay. And Rutendo?
Rutenda hasn't arrived, I don't know. They've left.
Okay.
So, I mean, we are very few, but they're still here. Let's honor it, no? Yeah.
So 6 people representing
Yeah,
6
fine.
projects.
Hi guys. Thank you for staying. We're not very many, but you're very hardcore. And we do realize that it's been a bit of a mouthful, maybe too long. And we are considering whether it should be that long tomorrow. I don't know. How many of you, hands up, are coming tomorrow? Any of you? Is it too long today? Okay. We will make changes in the program, but I would really appreciate if you could stay and just hear the next. This is a rapid-fire presentation, so it's short. You won't fall asleep, and you'll hear about some really amazing people and projects that are going on around the world. So what we wanted to do was just give you a little bit of a flavor, you know, that there is hope, there are actions and strategies in motion. It's not like some pipe dream. Lots of people are doing it. We just don't hear about it in mainstream media. So thank you for staying, and we will revise the program so you can rest tomorrow evening a bit earlier. Thank you.
Hi everyone, welcome. So good to see you here, still standing. Last one standing. But I am really happy to be here. My name is Ruby Reed, and I hope that your ears are primed, hearts open, and minds focused for this next rapid-fire session. We've got 8 incredible lighthouses of hope and action joining us from all around the world. Over the last few years, reports of polycrises have dominated mainstream media, like Henje was talking about. And at times it can feel like we're stuck in a quagmire of critique, binary thinking, polarization, or an stasis often met by so-called solutions that only seem to exacerbate the ecologically and socially destructive paradigms. But at the same time, there is an enormous upwelling of people and projects all around the world who are bringing together the radical imagination with ecologically and socially regenerative principles and structures, building bridges and alliances to nurture a mycorrhizal network of action and hope around the globe. Today, as I said, we're joined by 6 people representing 6 of those projects. Franco Augusto from Argentina, Priya Joshi from India, Diego Isabel La Moneda from Spain, Ruby van de Wekken from Finland, another Ruby, Ben Christie and myself, Ruby Reed from the UK. Each speaker has just 3 minutes to share a wealth of work, the ways they are embodying the principles of localization and the tangible impact they're having on the ground. And we have a short moment between each speaker when I will introduce them as they come on stage. Robin Wall Kimmerer states that it's not enough to weep for our lost landscapes. We have to put our hands in the earth to feel whole again. Each of our speakers tonight bring together this direct engagement with land, systems, and holistic thinking, as well as community building and bridging, modeling joyful, life-affirming pathways towards a world that we don't only know is possible, but that we all must play a role in co-creating now. So I'm going to try and go fast. I'm going to talk about 2 different projects, which I run, both of them together with my sister, Christabel, who's here. And I'm going to give about 1 minute to each. So Advaya is the first one I'm going to talk about. It is a transformative learning platform working to reframe how we understand, relate to, and live in the world around and within us. We began in 2015, and over the last 8, almost 9 years, we've been putting together events, gatherings, retreats, stages at festivals, and since COVID happened, mostly online courses, bringing people together with leaders, visionaries, activists, artists, teachers, practitioners, and leaders of our time in spaces of generative inquiry and radical collective imagining, to find ways of transition away from a materialist, domination-based paradigm, using ecology as our framework, and ecology is one of the really core things of Advaya, and all that ecology means when it comes to relationality, embeddedness into being. Advaya becomes a platform to collectively explore and embody ways of being and seeing that resensitize and re-enchant us to the beauty and magic of the world around us. We also are looking at pathways and strategies for the personal and collective transition that we need. And just on that topic, the first time I ever heard Helena Norberg-Hodge was a pivotal moment in regard to our own personal work. Totally transformed her. Hearing her speak about the structural problems in her analysis and critique of globalization meant that we could never not have that at the core of our work, together with the spiritual aspects that were always at the core of what we were doing from the start. So that's Advaya. It's holistic thinking, often quite conceptual. And I really strongly believe that we need that, but I also believe that we need practical skills. And so bringing all of our learnings from Advaya, and we still run Advaya and love Advaya, we also started a charity called Earthed. And Earthed is quite different. It's an online nature skills platform for a global community learning to grow. And in Earthed, we don't talk about concepts. We just talk about skills. Particularly after everything that happened with COVID and the massive difficulties we have talking to people with different points of view. We just thought, as an experiment, let's try and not have that within these aspects of the conversation. So we believe that the only way we can truly face the reality of biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse is through a peer-driven, mass-mobilized ecosystem restoration movement. Earth is responding to the barriers people face to participating in this. It's providing access to the necessary skills, networks, and funds that enable personal, collective, and ecological life to flourish. We're producing high-quality, bioregionally focused courses with nature leaders around the world, things like restoring rivers, planting no-dig gardens, replanting corals, trees, all of that. But anyway, I'm going to now pass on to the next people. Franco Augusto. So, our first speaker, Franco Augusto, is part of many social transformation projects, including the Global Tapestry of Alternatives, our service project, and REVO, which is the largest alternative education network in Latin America, Ecoversities Alliance, and the Enlivened Cooperative. So, Franco, I pass to you.
Okay, thank you. I know it's short time and we are all tired. I have been asked to share a bit about these different projects and networks that have been involved since many years. I came from the south of the so-called Abayala, colonial name America. Mapudungun will say Walmapu, it's Argentina. Maybe you know that country because of many reasons. Probably one of the main victims and experiments of the AMF, politics, globalization, and colonization. And probably we will get worse soon. I'm talking about where I come from because I think it's important. Starting my journey more than 20 years ago, in the context of the big crisis that Argentina had, me and other friends started to go around trying to find alternatives on different systems, different way of living. And we focus initially on the education, learning, and childhood caring processes, and we found out that people was taking care of themselves because of the lack of support of the state and market. So we found commonality, and we started a kind of a network process to document and travel around not only Argentina but Latin America and other parts of the world. And we created this large RIBO called Latin American Network, focused on alternatives to education and alternative education. So from that experience, we learned the necessity of going beyond that, and we encounter other friends doing similar stuff like the Coversities Alliance, that you may listen to that tomorrow, Alternative Universities Network. That took also another step to understand that the problem wasn't in a specific topic like education or learning, but we need to be cross-thematic, and that's where it connects one of the initiatives that we shared today in the afternoon called the Global Tapestry of Alternatives, that is seeking to connect grassroots processes all around the world in a tapestry, in a, let's say, meta-network that promotes, visibilizates, and encourages the creation of new alternatives at the local level. So we are working on that, and also the final project that I can mention is connected with the recovery of the memory, because of this movement of localness, going local, alternatives, etc. It's not something new. It's going around for many years, and we are trying to recover the main ideas that some of them emerged in Latin America, like putting limits, conviviality, and other stuff regarding the figure of Ivan Illich and others. That's called the Acervus project. So that's all. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Next, we're joined by Priya Joshi from India. She's a co-founder of Foodwise, working with an interconnected ecosystem of growers, producers, and consumers.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruby, and thank you, Franco. Good evening to all of you, and thank you for being here so late in the evening to listen to me talk about food, which we've spent quite a lot of time talking about today, but I know we also have people online, so hopefully it feels like it's a new discussion for some of them. I'm going to start with an illustration. Imagine if we lived in a world in which we ate one and only one thing. Let's assume that it was pasta. Pasta made from wheat as one main ingredient which is needed to make pasta. If we lived in a world like that, what would that mean really for biodiversity? What would it mean for livelihoods? What would it mean for health? And also, what would it mean for culture? Nearly 240 million hectares of land, agricultural land, is used to grow wheat around the world. It's not a lot in comparison to all the land around the world that is used to grow wheat. But if we were to eat only pasta and absolutely nothing else, it would mean that all agricultural production, on the one hand, would have to be for wheat, resulting in tremendous, immeasurable loss of biodiversity. On the other hand, however, it simply would not be possible because not all land is suitable for growing wheat. It would mean that farmers who cannot grow wheat would have to abandon their farmlands, lose livelihoods. It would mean that our diets would be devoid of nutrition, forcing us to move to artificial foods and to medicines. And this could be a reality. If not pasta, it could be biryani or burgers. At Foodwise, we are working to ensure that this does not become a reality. So we work together with the ecosystem of growers, producers, and consumers to help everyone develop a deeper connection with food and to understand why patronizing good food systems is really important. We do two things. We host learning and dining experiences. We call them pop-ups with a purpose, in which we're really helping people understand that food is important from a number of dimensions beyond its enjoyment and nourishment. And secondly, we work with organizations who are focused on having a positive influence on the future of food with capacity development. So we work with them to define a vision, to create integrated delivery plans, to develop a network of collaborators, and essentially to build capability. What we're really doing is unlocking the power of food wisdom, because we believe that when we are wise about food, we can be wise about the world. Thank you.
Diego Isabel La Moneda from Spain is the co-founder and director of the Nessie Forum.
Quality of life is getting worse and more difficult, both in urban areas and big cities and rural areas. Have you realized that the cause of the problems of urban areas and rural areas is the same? If you go to big cities, you have pollution, stress, housing prices increasing, and then if you go to rural areas, you have lack of services, lack of employment, aging population, less people being farmers or taking care of nature. But the cause of the problem is the same. One day, someone get the luggage and move from there to here with the promise of a better life. In the Nessie Forum, in the New Economy and Social Innovation Forum, we are trying to change the economy. And we have to realize that we need to decentralize the economy. So we need to find the way, to find the motivations, the incentives for thousands of people moving from there to there. How to motivate big companies of services, IT companies, financial companies, insurance companies, consultancy companies, to allow to decentralize employers, to allow people to live in rural areas or small towns or small cities instead of big cities. So that is the way to decentralize, to democratize the economy. That is the way to stop climate change. So if we want to change the economy and to decentralize the economy, then we need to change the direction of migration from rural areas to big cities, the other way around, to big cities to rural areas. So if you think this is an interesting topic, I will really be happy to get in touch with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ruby van der Wekken.
Thank you, Ruby. Another Ruby in the room. Hi, dear all. I'm bringing you greetings from Finland, where I am what they call a producer member for our beautiful food co-op called Oma maa, or Our Soil. To our co-op belong 2 farms, a kitchen and a little membership place in town where we have a cafe running and where in the evening sometimes we engage in not fine dining, but farm dining. And in that manner, we make food bags around the year. Yes, you heard that correctly. We make food bags around the year in Finland for 50 weeks of the 52 weeks of a year. They can be including products as, for instance, our rye bread or baguette, falafel, seitan, oat yogurt, fresh produce, or then also dry products. So we engage in secondary production. Now, we are what is called a community-supported agriculture initiative. And very often we speak of that as being food members and producer members coming together to form a web of mutual support. And there's a lot of accent on the issue of helping. Now, helping is good, and that needs to be acknowledged that indeed our farmers do need help. But the significance of our community-supported agriculture initiatives, of our community-led initiatives, which we are talking about so much here, goes beyond that. Now, many actors will be saying today that if we change the systems of our basic needs, meaning if we change the way we produce, consume, and distribute our basic needs as food, of course, as energy, as transport, we can through that be developing pathways to be towards much more healthier and more fair communities and through that society. But what is much less acknowledged, and this is a plea for us to be putting that on the table, is that those processes of change, they only really lead to systemic change when they are in the hands of people. Because the markets have shown time and time again that they are failing to deliver on the values that are important to us. And with people's processes, of course, are talking about that co-governing, that co-producing, that co-carrying of responsibility for that what we have in common. In other words, I'm talking about the paradigm shift of the commons. Now, it matters to put that on the table. It matters to acknowledge where the roots for change are, because we need more people to come on board of our initiatives in order for them to be strong. It's only by engaging in them that we understand what our political demands are. And ultimately also, there can only be food sovereignty in places like the Global South if we here in the North take up our food sovereignty. So ultimately, that is also about justice.
Ben Christie, co-founder of Wisdom Keepers, Medicine Festival, and Frokel.
Thanks, Ruby. Yeah, wow, what an incredible array of amazing work that's going on. I guess I wanted to share some of the learnings around getting those organizations going. I'm here with my colleagues, Kate and Patricia. We've founded FROCAL, Forest Row Local, just at the start of COVID, when I love saying that, you know, the plague, when Mother Nature sent humanity to the naughty step for a good long think about its behavior. We set out to convene, connect, and catalyze people in our community around 6 topics, essentially around well-being. I think in this group we can understand the food and the water and the various different aspects of it, but well-being in a deep sense in our community, and seeing what it would look like to help people come together and to network them. And we had some successes, we had some terrible failures, we learned a lot by doing what we were doing. Very much inspired by Helena over the years, and also by flat-pack democracy. So we set about getting a group together and really kind of training ourselves up in what it would look like to take on the lowest, I was not sure about saying the lowest form of government, that sounds terrible, but the lowest level of government in our parish council. So in May this year, 15 of us ran for 15 seats, and we were very lucky in that we got 14 out of the 15 seats. So we've got pretty kind of substantial mandate there, and a very supportive parish council office. So we have a budget of about £500,000, and critically, we have the ability to communicate with everyone in the community, and we can raise money by using the Public Works Loan Board, which is a government facility that gives us money at a couple of rates lower than commercial interest rates. So now we're in a place where we're just starting to reach out to the community and actually try and enable what it wants to see happening in the community, rather than us heroically trying to do everything ourselves, trying to kind of catalyze what wants to rise up by enabling as much as we can by being in communication, and when needed, raising funds or connecting folks in different ways, different resources. So I guess just to kind of conclude, I'm not sure if we've got anyone else after me. I just wanted to, what we're working on, what we're looking at is governance, and then so sharing the power amongst us, trying to divest power from the center, and stepping on into shared ownership of energy. Energy is where there's real hegemony of power and ownership. Using the technology as it is now, decentralizing, we can also share the ownership of the energy and start bringing those resources, that money, back into our community to fund what else we want to see, all these regenerative practices which often struggle to raise money to deliver them. So I guess the last kind of point I really wanted to leave everyone with is a sense of it's how we do what we're setting out to do. Those are some strategies, but what we're really focusing on is how do we do that? How do we share the power as a principle of what we set out to do, using all the best practices we can, and some of the oldest ones in the sense of the circle, really kind of listening to each other and enabling each other with the technologies, the ultimate technology of the center, of the circle. How can we listen to each other and enable the wisdom of the community to show up and then enact it using some of those key strategies? So there we are. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And obviously, it was such a short amount of time to hear everyone speak about the inspiring projects they're involved in and started. So I recommend checking them out on the website and reading much more because there's such a wealth. Yeah? Oh, great. So we didn't realize you were here. So nice. So Ele Saltmarsh.
Hi, I have to apologize to everyone, especially the organizers, for being very late and panicking everyone. The trouble with getting farmers to arrive at your conferences is that sometimes farm things happen. We had a ram go loose in the village, and I had to make a quite embarrassing post on the Facebook page saying, has anyone seen this guy? He's very friendly, very big horns, very big balls. If anyone could let me know. But luckily, my local community came to my aid. I have managed to trade some pork chops for the safe return of our ram, and everything's good, and I can tell you a little bit more about the farm and a little bit about what I'm doing. So I probably met some of you guys. I probably met some of you when I was yay high, when my mum dragged me around to things like this, and I thought they were incredibly boring. And yet, here I am again. That's my mum, Jyoti Fernandez. I grew up on a little farm down in South Dorset, and I'm once again back on the farm after many years away, studying and discovering that there's really no place in the world that is better to be. I did know that when I was little. I basically asked the world for nothing more than clean air, clean water, a place where I didn't have to talk to very many people, and where I could just bake bread, raise chickens. And that was too much of an ask, I guess. When I was 16 or so, I did a little research project into climate change and said to my teachers, hey, do they know that the world's going to burn? And they said, yeah. We've got maybe a couple of years, and I thought a couple of years, that'll be enough time for me to fix it. So I went to university, and I did some work there, and I'm still working on trying to fix it. I'm older now. I'm a lot more tired now. And I've kind of got to the point where I don't think we can fix it anymore. We're going to watch the world burn a little bit. We already are. We're going to see wars. We're going to see mass migration. We're going to see even more people starving. And it's really hard to deal with, especially as a youth. I know that this is just going to be the sort of situation that we face on a year-to-year, on a day-to-day basis. But it's also really it's possible for us to do something about it still, for us to try to adapt, for us to try to evolve into a new world. And so right now, what I'm working on is figuring out how that can happen. And I know so many of you are working on so many projects that are also looking at how we can make that happen. One of the best ways is through strengthening our local economies, through relying on our local communities, so that when the wars come and the heat and the famine comes, we have people we can rely on, and we have our little pieces of nature around us that we can rely on to draw strength on and really draw energy from to try and cope with all of this change. One of the things I'm working on right now is looking at a food security plan for a tiny area of the UK down near Bridport and the surrounding areas. And it's just, you know, the town council thought maybe we should do something about this. Maybe we can scrape together 5 days' wages for someone to do some science and figure out how we can feed our local population and what we should encourage our farmers to produce. What sort of crops will maybe be more resilient? Is there a way that perhaps we could encourage some more people to enter horticultural professions around here so that we aren't as faced by price spikes or anything when we get more storms? And that little piece of work is going to help improve the future of the population of maybe 20,000. It's not very big. And yet, every single location across the UK also is doing something like that. I've heard about the Fief diet and the Preston project. and Bristol's community energy project. I've heard so much about that today. It's all these little puzzle pieces slotting together that all seem like they're going to make a really strong network of resilient little community hubs across the UK. So I better stop talking now so that I can give you back to the organisers and they can tell you about tomorrow. But there will be some more time tomorrow where I and some other amazing youths can tell you a bit more about the horribleness of the world that we face. It's Inheriting a World in Crisis. It'll be on tomorrow. And then the day after, on Sunday, I can tell you a bit about the small farm revolution, just one way that we are trying to fix that thing. So I hope to see you guys all there.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Amazing voices, and thank you for all of you to staying. We were going to have music with Jörgis. Oh, and Jörgis, thankfully, you're going to be here tomorrow, and we're going to find a way to incorporate it into the program, and so you won't have to stay for so long, because we talked about that earlier. We really appreciate you being here. Do you want to say something, Jörgis? You want music? Okay, we want music.
But I'm fucked. Because I took my guitar off, the microphone, all the beautiful instruments. What am I going to do? I'm going to sing. You want me to sing? Let's do a little experiment. I'm definitely not going to do something tremendously transcendental right now. However, if we manage to focus attention for a couple of minutes, we can get a taste of it, which is sometimes as good as it's going to get. Right? Okay. So the first premise of entertainment is that I'm holding attention. I told a joke. I sang and you really enjoyed it. Right? You were stunned by my articulate nature and the way that I was grabbing those notes. But entertainment is the problem that we have and that we face. And it becomes a lot more fun if all of a sudden you don't rely on the same technologies we've been using, much in the way that we do with this, to aggregate power. And today I heard something super beautiful. I heard someone speak. I heard someone